Thank you, Sir Roger. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I first of all welcome the Minister to his post? And I have to say, I have great admiration and respect for the Minister, not just only in his current role, but the role that he had prior to this. And I do hope the Minister has had a chance to read my speech, which I sent over yesterday, and in particular, the 10 specific questions which I'll be asking the Minister to address. In recent years, Sir Roger, we have witnessed a proliferation of the use of unmanned aerial vehicles, better known as drones. These are remotely piloted aircraft predominantly used by states to conduct intelligence, surveillance, and increasingly to carry out armed strikes. The debate today looks at the military use of armed drones by the United Kingdom and the United States. And it appears that the government sees drones as having an increasingly greater role in our armed forces. According to Vice Chief of the Defence Staff, General Nicholas Houghton, we may see a tipping point by the mid-2020s, where the UK will move away from manned fast jets to unmanned combat aerial vehicles and missiles. The government recently announced that the number of Reaper drones operating in Afghanistan by the UK were to double to 10, and that operations were for the first time to be conducted from RAF Waddington in Lincolnshire. Currently, the UK's 5 Reaper drones are operated by British personnel from Creech Air Base in Nevada, and the latest figures show that they have flown 40,000 hours and fired 345 missiles in Afghanistan. Whilst drones offer the potential to target insurgents without having to put our armed forces in harm's way, we need to ensure all steps are taken to prevent civilian casualties. Despite their growing significance, there has been little debate about this issue. And I believe the time is right for a review into how they are currently used and how they may be developed and deployed in the future. The first question I would like the Minister to address is what is the government's current policy on the use of drones, particularly their operation in Afghanistan and Pakistan. The second question is how many civilians have been killed by UK drone strikes in Afghanistan. The third, and linked to this, does the Minister agree with me that the death of civilians in Afghanistan undermines the aim of winning over hearts and minds and feeds the anti-West feeling? And if civilians cannot be protected, does the Minister agree with me that we should consider suspending the use of drones? Earlier this year, I visited Pakistan, having been a former advisor to Benazir Bhutto, and I met President Zardari, senior ministers, and many local people. Ever I went, concerns were raised about the use of drone strikes in Pakistan by foreign countries. There were real concerns that this would feed into the anti-West attitude played on by radical elements. Whilst the UK has only operated British drones in Afghanistan, the United States has used drones as part of their counter-terrorism strategy in Pakistan, in Somalia, and in Yemen. According to reports, this has resulted in hundreds of civilian casualties. And the Bureau of Investigative Journalism believes that since 2004, over 350 strikes in Pakistan have taken place, and 3,378 people may have been killed, including 885 civilians. This has fed into the anti-West feeling, with 74% of Pakistanis now seeing the United States as an enemy, and only 17% supporting their use of unmanned strikes. One such victim was Dawood Khan, a local tribal elder from Dadakal, who was killed in March 2011, along with 40 other people, whilst attending a jirga, which is a peaceful council of elders. His son, Nur Khan, has launched legal proceedings in the United Kingdom, alleging that the British government provided locational intelligence to the CIA about individuals of interest to the United States, and that this intelligence is then used to direct drone attacks in Pakistan. And the legal statement for this case asserts that if government officials assisted the CIA to direct arm attacks in Pakistan, they are in principle liable under domestic criminal law. Such allegations damage our relationship with Pakistan, who will draw their own inferences from the government's refusal to confirm or deny whether intelligence has been shared with the United States. Yes, of course I give way.
For bringing this matter to this House. Does anyone member not agree that while we regret the loss of civilian lives, it is vastly important that the drones have a military objective to achieve, to take on terrorism? Is it not better to use drones and save British lives and the British Army lives than for that very reason?
Thank you. It's a very important point. I think the thing I would say to the honourable member is I'm not against the use of drones, but in terms of how they are deployed, if I may say to him, a certain assertion has been made that the United States operate drone strikes not simply against known targets, but against suspects. And that is completely unacceptable, where somebody may or may not be an insurgent. Drones have their own place, and I think if they can be deployed, if the intelligence is good, then of course we have to look at using them. But where there is fatal casualties, for example in Pakistan, 885 out of 3,300 is completely unacceptable. So I'm asking for assurances from the Minister to ensure that the drones are linked to proper intelligence, and therefore, if steps can be taken to avoid civilian casualties, then I think on that basis, of course, they can be used to target known militants, and they have been used to target known militants.
Would my honourable friend give way?
I give way.
Jason McCartney.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for giving way. And as a former RAF officer, can I just say that a poorly targeted airstrike is a poorly targeted airstrike, whether it's a Tornado, Mirage, F-15 or a remotely piloted vehicle. Can I also praise him for at least bringing in the phrase remotely piloted vehicles? These aren't unmanned, they do have a pilot, they are remotely piloted. We must get away from the idea that these are, technology flying around as in Terminator, just destroying targets as well. But would you agree with me? Last week I actually saw the Reaper Squadron combating Somali piracy and really helping reduce Somali piracy attacks. Would you agree with me that they do have very, very good uses when used well by Allied forces?
Rehman Chishti.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for making that point, and the point he makes is, when they are used well, which is a key point actually. Of course, having seen drone strikes in Pakistan, where you've had Batullah Masood, a known terrorist who was taken out, of course they have their use. But equally, the key other element to that is the huge number of civilians that are being losing their lives. And linked to that, it undermines the work in Afghanistan, because the hearts and minds that we want to win are undermined when you lose so many civilians. So, of course, there is the issue about they should be used, absolutely, but it's about the use of proportionality and to ensure that they're used with proper intelligence. But I thank him for his own expertise in the area. So, Roger, the point I was making, and I have touched on it previously, is that the use of these drones fosters the anti-West sentiments, which could be a danger to our own security in this country. The fourth question is, can the government make its position clear as to whether the UK has shared locational intelligence with the United States leading to drone strikes in Pakistan? Also, at number 5, what is the government's current policy on the circumstances in which intelligence may be lawfully transferred? And at number 6, does the Minister and the government believe that there is an armed conflict in Pakistan? And at number 7, if not, does the government accept that if a UK national were to carry out a targeted killing in Pakistan, could they in principle be liable under domestic criminal law? And at number 8, and if this is the case, does the government accept that if UK officials share intelligence with the CIA, which he knows or believes to be used to assist in drone strikes, they could, in principle, be liable under UK law? I recently asked a question to the Secretary of State in relation to locational intelligence on the floor of the House, and his answer raised more questions than it answered. He said in his reply that the United States operates in Afghanistan under a different basis of law from the one under which we operate. As I understand, there is only one basis of international law. So my next point to the Minister is, what is the basis of the law that government believes that the United States is operating under, and why is this so different to international law? Drone use by the United States raises a number of legal questions. It has been argued that drone strikes in Pakistan are being carried out in violation of international humanitarian law. The high number of civilians killed in such attacks who are not participants in armed conflict raises questions about whether their use is proportionate. Christoph Haynes, the UN Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial killings, has even suggested that some of the drone attacks may constitute war crimes. A recent report by Stanford University and New York University called Living Under Drones describes the strike's effects on cultural, religious and community life in Pakistan, where some families even refuse to send their children to school in case they are attacked. The authors also detail the use of double-tap strikes, where the same area is attacked multiple times, which is deterring humanitarian assistance. At a time when Pakistan is facing severe poverty and 1 in 4 are living on £1 a day or less, drone strikes threaten to undermine the work achieved through international aid. By 2015, Pakistan would become the UK's largest recipient of aid, yet this goodwill is threatened by such military activity. We need to ensure that Afghanistan and Pakistan are safe and secure countries. However, drone strikes can undermine the important battle of winning hearts and minds. My next question to the Minister at number 10 is about whether drones are being used proportionately and whether enough is being done to protect civilians. Sir Roger, in conclusion, these issues deserve serious consideration, and if drones are to become more widely used, and we must ensure that they are deployed so as to not to risk civilian deaths, collateral damage, our international relations, and do not pose a danger to our national security. And I urge the Minister to ensure that the United Kingdom's policy on drones and sharing intelligence, which may be used in drone strikes, is fully compliant with the relevant national and international law. And on that point, I'll just say to the points raised by some honourable members is with regards to the use of drones. If they are used in accordance with our own national law and international law, I don't have a problem with that. But there are real concerns at the moment about whether they are being used properly under our national law or international law, linked to the issue of sharing intelligence with the United States, which may then lead to attacks in Pakistan. These questions are serious questions and serious needs to be answered, which in my view, Sir Roger, damage the excellent work our country does around the world with international aid, rightly and properly, and winning over hearts and minds. Looking back in 2005 in London, the tragic bombings we had in the United Kingdom were linked to the border region of Afghanistan and Pakistan. We need to have a secure, prosperous Afghanistan and Pakistan, which may be linked to the international security. Thank you, Sir Roger.
Order. Order. In half-hour German debates, only the sponsoring member may speak unless others have the consent of both the sponsoring member and the Minister. My understanding is that Jasmine Qureshi and Nick Harvey have both sought consent to do this. But the Chair does deprecate the fact that a Minister is sometimes left without sufficient time to respond. So I'd be grateful if honourable members would keep these contributions very brief indeed. Jasmine Qureshi.
Thank you, Sir Gale. Sir Roger. Can I first congratulate my honourable friend for securing this particular debate. It is incredibly important, this issue, especially in the countries of Afghanistan and Pakistan. In my constituency, I have people from the Pakistani, Kashmiri heritage and Afghani heritage as well. And they have come and spoken to me several times and written many emails and letters to me about the drones attack, especially some of them have members of family who live in this particular part of Pakistan, Waziristan and other areas. And they can tell me, and they have told me in person about the effects of these drone attacks. They say, how would you feel that you're sleeping at night, just sleeping away, and suddenly you hear all these drone attacks, buildings being destroyed, people being killed. You don't know from day to day what's going to be happening. 1 minute you're peacefully asleep in your bed, and next minute, half an hour later, there's some kind of attack taking place. How would we like that if we were living, in Bolton, which is my constituency, we're asleep, and this sort of things happening, where you see young children dying, where you see adults, old people. Everybody has made so much about the issue of young Malala being shot. But there are so many other young Malalas in that part of the world, and young boys as well, and families who are being destroyed. Now, our argument for using drone attacks in those countries is always been what we're doing trying to get rid of the Taliban or the Al-Qaeda. According to some statistics, and this was recently a study done by America in itself, that in fact of all the drone strikes done, only 2% of people killed could have been possibly called Al-Qaeda or Taliban. 98% of the people who've been killed by these drone attacks have actually been civilians, people not involved in armed conflict. Now, it's fine that we should protect our country, and of course, you know, I live in this country and I want my protection as well. But is it really fair? Is it really fair that we should be engaging in things which actually lead to 98% of people who are dying are actually ordinary innocent civilians? I'm sorry to say that is not right. And the reason this isn't right is because the way the drones are used. I entirely accept the fact that if they're used properly, if they are targeted at people who are known to be involved in illegal or criminal activities, then there could be a justification for that. And I said the word could be justification because in the UN Article 2, subsection 4, it says that you can use force if the host nation agrees and is in self-defense. And from everything we've heard from the Pakistan government, they do not agree to these drones being used in their country. And in fact, recently, the Pakistan Foreign Minister, Hina Rabbani, at the UN Human Rights Convention in Geneva, said that they are objecting to this. So there is actually the question of legality of these wars or weapons being used as well, when it's then coupled with the fact that, in effect, they're not targeted properly. It's not the case that you see a particular house or a position where there are people who are known as committing criminal or terrorist offences. If you target them, that may just be right if it's according with international law. But when, as it has been now found, that in fact these drones are actually not being targeted specifically, and the evidence is more and more that they're not actually targeted at specific people, but they are being done randomly, or that they're being controlled by someone, and in America it's the case of the intelligence service, the CIA controlling the drone. Not even the army are controlling it, but CIA are doing it. And in the fact that they have successive strikes where in the same venues hit more than just once, that cannot be right. And I'm sorry if I'm sounding very passionate about this, but really you've got innocent, thousands and thousands of lives have died in Pakistan, and of course thousands and thousands of lives in Afghanistan, and of course in Yemen and other places. But obviously I don't have many constituents from Yemen, so I can really at this moment talk a lot about Pakistan and Afghanistan, and of course that is where the most intensive use of drones has been. I'm sorry to say that there are ways of fighting a battle, but at the same time, we do have to be mindful of international laws. And I'm actually very grateful, and I wonder if the Minister will also welcome when the investigation is being carried out by the UN Rapporteur on Counter-Terrorism, Ben Emerson QC, a British lawyer, who's going to be carrying out this investigation as to whether the use of these drones is legal or not. And I like to ask the Minister that if they say that it is illegal, then are we going to desist from using them in our campaign? And my final question to the Minister, my only second and final question to the Minister is that if the drones are being used, are they legally being used? And secondly, are they being used strategically? Because the evidence at this moment in time tells us they're not being used properly, and they are leading to thousands and thousands and thousands of innocent people's life being wrecked. We wouldn't like it if we didn't know that we're going to a wedding or a funeral or procession or something, that suddenly we're being attacked. And I think we should put ourselves in the position of those people who live in that country as well.
Sir Roger, there is nothing inherently wicked or inherently virtuous about a remotely piloted aircraft. The moral questions that have been raised hinge entirely on what is done with them. In this sense, there is little, if any, valid comparison to be made between what the United States does with remotely piloted aircraft in Pakistan and what we do with them in Afghanistan. It is up to the United States and not up to a British minister to justify what they do with them in Pakistan, and we will all have our own view on that. In terms of our use of remotely piloted aircraft in Afghanistan, I think we should be very proud and very pleased with the part that remotely piloted aircraft are playing in our campaign in Afghanistan. I have visited Creech in Nevada. I have watched the RAF pilots who are remotely piloting the aircraft in Afghanistan. Because they do tours of duties of a couple of years or so, they have got a more intimate knowledge of the situation on the ground very often than those who are sent to patrol on foot, who do a 6-month tour of duty. And I believe, from what I've seen, that in many instances they actually have a restraining impact on what actually takes place on the ground. The ability of a remotely piloted aircraft to hover, to loiter, to build up an intelligence picture over as much as 24 hours and use that information and share it with those who are on the ground has a civilizing effect, in my view, on the nature of the combat that takes place on the ground. And to suggest that they are inherently evil and that we should discard them from our inventory would be a bad mistake. And I hope that the prophecy of the Vice Chief that they will become increasingly common in years to come will prove to be true.
Minister.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship here today. I'd just like to start in the shorter time that I have available today to congratulate the Honourable Member for Gillingham and Rainham for securing this important debate and bringing this subject to the floor of the House, which clearly arouses considerable passions, some better informed than others, but all of which are important, and it's a good opportunity to be able to place the Ministry of Defence use of unmanned air vehicles on the record in this way. So I'm grateful to him, and I shall endeavour to answer as many of his detailed questions as I can in the time that I have available. I'd first just like to take a few minutes to explain the context in which the UK Armed Forces operates our fleet of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, often referred to as drones. The term drone itself is misleading, as it implies that there is no human input into the operation of UAVs. Military personnel, as has been expressed by my honourable friend from Colne Valley with his direct experience, are intimately involved in the operation of UAVs flown by UK forces, with professional pilots in control and military and civilian personnel analysing collected information. I know that the Chief of the Air Staff, Air Chief Marshal Sir Stephen Dalton, prefers the term remotely piloted aircraft system as used by my honourable friend from Colne Valley, which better reflects that trained personnel are always engaged in the decision-making process. And for the sake of clarity, I will use the more widely recognised UAV terminology in these remarks, though I entirely agree with the Air Chief Marshal's sentiment. The UK has a number of UAV systems currently deployed in support of operations in Afghanistan. These are vital to the success of the mission, and I recognise that their use, while often emotive, is indeed something that we can use this debate to dispel some of the misapprehensions that surround their deployment. UAVs are saving the lives of both British and coalition service personnel and Afghan civilians on a daily basis. Their use is predominantly as intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, ISR assets, and when weapons are deployed, the decision-making process leading to the identification and engagement of a target is identical to that of manned aircraft. The UAV systems being operated in Afghanistan form part of a mix of airborne ISR capabilities, of which they are but one, albeit increasingly important, component. They complement the more traditional manned surveillance capabilities provided by aircraft such as Sentinel or the Sea King helicopter. But uniquely, UAVs provide an unblinking and persistent ISR presence, which can be exploited with the relief of crews while the aircraft remains airborne, as the Honourable Member for North Devon was making clear. This would be too resource-intensive to provide from manned aircraft alone. This persistent surveillance provides a significantly more complete intelligence picture, which decreases the risk of misidentifying targets of interest. The ability of UAVs to loiter over areas surveying for enemy activity feeding video and imagery intelligence to commanders in real time makes them an invaluable asset on the ground in Afghanistan and allows coalition forces to stay one step ahead of the enemy. UAV capability in Afghanistan, as with all our deployed capabilities, is constantly under review. Reaper is the UK's only medium-altitude, long-endurance ISR platform currently in service, and it has provided ISR capabilities to coalition forces in Afghanistan since October 2007. Very briefly.
Chishti.
Afghanistan, can the Minister just clarify, does he have the facts and figures of how many civilian casualties have occurred as a result of those drones?
I will be coming on to that in my remarks to address his question specifically. Reaper has provided over 40,000 hours of persistence intelligence in support of our frontline troops, providing vital situational awareness, helping to save military and civilian lives in Afghanistan. And its success has been such that the Prime Minister announced in December 2010 that there will be an increase in the number of Reaper that the Royal Air Force operates. The Army also operates unarmed tactical UAVs for ISR purposes and has recently introduced a range of latest nano UAV technology to service operations this year. Together, the UK's fleet of UAVs have provided well over 100,000 hours of flying in Afghanistan. Although its primary role is ISR, Reaper is also the UK's only armed UAV. In its armed configuration, Reaper has been certified only for use in support of ground forces in Afghanistan. It was not used, for example, during Operation Elemi over Libya, and I can assure the Honourable Gentleman and the Honourable Lady, in answer to their questions, that it has not been operated in Pakistan. Nor, indeed, is Reaper used in Somalia. I think the Honourable Gentleman was looking perhaps at Predator UAVs operated by the US in Somalia. I'm afraid I've only got a very short amount of time. I've got many questions of yours, of the Honourable Gentleman to deal with. It's important to note that Reaper does not have the capability to deploy its weapons system unless commanded to do so by the flight crew, who are trained to operate under the Geneva Conventions on the Law of Armed Conflict, otherwise known as international humanitarian law. On the rare occasions that weapons are used, 349 precision-guided weapons have been employed since Reaper went to Afghanistan. The strict rules of engagement for the use of weapons are the same as those that apply to manned combat aircraft and have been designed to minimise the risk to civilians. The selection and prosecution of all targets is based on a rigorous scrutiny process compliant with international law. Reaper is launched and recovered by crews deployed in Afghanistan. However, its missions are exclusively controlled by RAF personnel based outside of Afghanistan. This means that rather than rotate through a 6-month deployment to theatre, operators can build up an unsurpassed degree of knowledge and experience. The weapons carried by Reaper are all precision-guided, and the type is carefully selected in every engagement to ensure the most appropriate munition is used to allow the required effect, so minimising risk to civilians and their property. I'm aware of only one incident where civilians have been killed by weapons deployed from a UK Reaper, and as the Honourable Gentleman may be aware, on the 25th of March 2011, a strike on 2 pickup trucks carrying a significant quantity of explosives resulted in the death of 4 Afghan civilians as well as 2 insurgents. This incident was highly regrettable, but the subsequent report concluded that the actions of the Reaper crew had been in accordance with extant procedures and the UK rules of engagement. The moral, ethical and legal issues associated with the operation and use of weapons from UAVs are the same as those for manned aircraft. As I said at the beginning, there is always a human in the loop. While technological advances will likely increase the level of automation in some systems, just as in other non-military equipment, the government has no intention to develop systems that operate without human intervention in the weapon command and control chain. The Honourable Gentleman raised a number of questions regarding the use of armed UAVs by the United States. I am not going to comment on the operations of our allies, and as is long-standing government policy, for reasons of operational security, the Ministry of Defence does not comment on its intelligence sharing arrangements with coalition partners. Countries can, of course, make their own interpretation of what they are permitted to do under international law, and it is a matter for the US administration, whoever that might be following today's election, to assure themselves that the actions they undertake are lawful. In Afghanistan, our UAVs are an increasingly important means of providing vital information to our ground forces. They've been proven to provide great military benefit, and I can reassure the honourable gentleman and this House that I'm satisfied that the UK's policy on UAVs is fully compliant with national and international law.